Noah grew up surrounded by marble and gold, in a house where silence echoed louder than laughter. Every corner of the mansion shone with wealth, glass chandeliers, imported rugs, endless corridors that seemed to stretch into nowhere. But for all its beauty, something vital was missing. A warmth, a voice, a presence that could make the house feel like a home. His father, Adrian, was a man of reputation and power. Every newspaper spoke his name with respect. Every business associate greeted him with caution. He was the kind of man who built empires with a single glance and destroyed competition with a signature. Yet, within his own home, he built walls even higher than those of his company. Noah was only 6, yet he could already sense it. The emptiness behind the luxury. His room overflowed with toys, his closets with clothes he didn't care about, and the garden outside was a private kingdom he was forbidden to share. Every time he played, it felt like pretending. He had everything, and yet, not what he truly wanted. When Noah asked about his mother, Adrian's eyes would harden. The air itself would freeze. She's not part of our lives, he would say. No explanation, no name, just that. Like a door slammed shut forever, Noah learned not to ask too often. But the question stayed alive inside him. It grew, quietly, like a plant in darkness, reaching for any hint of light. Among the dozen workers who filled the house, one woman stood apart. Leela. She wasn't just a housekeeper. She was the soul of the place, even if she never claimed to be. She tucked Noah into bed at night, prepared his meals with care, and told him soft stories about heroes who found their way home. Her eyes always carried a warmth that no one else dared to show in that house bit. Noah could see something else in her eyes too, a sadness she tried to hide behind her smiles. Sometimes he'd ask, "Did you know my mom?" And her voice would tremble before she answered, "Some things are hard to talk about." No, when she said that, she'd turn away quickly, as if afraid her face might reveal too much. There were nights when Noah dreamed of a woman who looked a little like Leela, a woman with gentle eyes and a touch that felt like sunlight. She never spoke in his dreams, but she always reached out her hands as if to hold him. When he woke, he could still feel her warmth. Fading like mist, dreams came again and again, until he began to believe they weren't dreams at all, but memories from before he could remember. Downstairs, the mansion followed Adrian's rules like a religion. Every worker knew what not to say. No one mentioned the name of Noah's mother. Adrian had made that clear from the beginning. Any mention of her, and they would lose their job instantly, so they stayed silent. And silence, over time, became the true master of the house. Noah started noticing how people reacted when he walked into a room. Conversations stopped. Smiles became stiff. Eyes turned away. He wasn't stupid. Even as a child, he could feel the tension. Something was wrong, and it was all tied to the mystery of the woman who was never mentioned. Yet then there was the day when everything began to shift. It started simply. Noah had been sick for 2 days, fever burning through him. Leela stayed by his bedside, wiping his forehead with cool water, whispering lullabies. Her hands shook, but her voice stayed calm. She never left his side, not even when the rest of the staff said she should rest. As she leaned over to fix his pillow, a few strands of her hair fell aside, revealing a small dark mark on her neck, a birthmark shaped almost like a crescent moon. Noah's eyes, heavy with fever, caught it. He blinked, confused, then reached out weakly and touched it with his small fingers. "Leela, you have the same mark as Leela." Frozen, her breath caught, her eyes widened, and for a long moment, she didn't move. Noah turned his head slowly, pulling his collar down. On the side of his own neck, the same mark for the first time in his young life. Lila's composure broke. Tears filled her eyes, but she said nothing. She simply looked at him, and in that look, there was both pain and love too big for words. Noah smiled faintly before his eyelids fell. He drifted back to sleep, unaware that what had just happened would change everything. Next morning, when he woke, he remembered everything. Looked at Leela closely, searching for that mark again, but she had hidden it under her hair. She acted calm, kind, as always, asking if he wanted breakfast. But now, every word between them carried a secret under it, something both of them knew, but neither dared to say. Noah didn't ask again. Not yet. He waited, watched, and wondered. That night, when he looked in the mirror, he traced his own mark with a finger. He could feel it glowing faintly under his skin, as if it remembered something ancient. He thought of Lila's mark, and a strange warmth filled him. Maybe he wasn't crazy. Maybe all his dreams, the woman, the soft eyes, the feeling of being held, weren't dreams at all. Didn't know how. But something told him that Leela was more than who she pretended to be. Deep inside the mansion's golden silence, truth began to stir. The mansion was quieter than usual after that night. The staff moved like ghosts, whispering in corners and glancing nervously at closed doors. Even the sound of the clock ticking in the grand hallway seemed louder. Noah felt it, a shift, a weight in the air that hadn't been there before he tried to act normal. But something inside him had changed. Every time he saw Leela, his eyes searched her face, her hands, the side of her neck. He wanted to ask again, but part of him was afraid. Afraid that if he said it aloud, everything might fall apart. Adrian, on the other hand, remained the same. Sharp suits, perfect posture, and the same cold expression whenever Noah entered the room. Their dinners together were filled with silence. The clinking of silverware louder than any conversation on evening. Noah gathered his courage. "Father," he said quietly, "why don't I have a mom like other kids?" Adrian didn't look up from his plate. "You have everything you need here," he replied. "That's enough, but that's enough, Noah." The word struck like a door slamming shut. Noah stared at his food, his appetite gone. He wanted to ask more, but he could feel that invisible wall again, the one his father had built long ago later that night. Noah sat by his window, staring into the garden. The wind moved through the trees softly, whispering things he couldn't quite understand. He thought about the mark, about Lila's eyes when he mentioned it. The world suddenly seemed full of things no one wanted him to see next morning. He walked through the long hallway lined with framed photographs. His father shaking hands with politicians, smiling beside CEOs, standing at galas with glass in hand. But there was something strange. Not a single photo of his mother. Not one hope in the drawers, the albums, the dusty shelves in the library. Nothing. It was as though she had been erased. Telling he asked Leela. She didn't answer. Instead, she hugged him tightly and whispered, "You are loved, Noah. That's what matters." But Noah shook his head. "I don't just want to be loved. I want to know who I am that night." As he lay in bed, he promised himself that he would find out the truth. No matter what it took. The next few weeks made that promise harder to keep. Adrian's rule seemed to tighten around the house like a noose. He began giving new orders, curfews, locked doors, restricted areas. Even Leela seemed to disappear more often. Busy in far parts of the mansion, it didn't take long for Noah to realize why. Adrian was separating them aside in the way she was sent to clean the east wing instead of his room, in how she was assigned double shifts in the kitchen, in the tired way she smiled when she passed him in the hallway. Unable to stop for more than a few seconds, Noah tried to follow her once, down to the laundry room where she was folding sheets. "Why are you avoiding me?" he asked softly. Lila froze, her hand still clutching a white sheet. "I'm not avoiding you." Noah dot double quotes yes. You. Her eyes trembled. "Some things are just complicated. Does father tell you what to do?" She hesitated. "He tells everyone what to do." Noah felt anger rise in his chest. He wanted to scream, but instead he whispered, "I don't care what he says. I want to talk to you." Her lips curved into a soft, trembling smile. "And I want to talk to you too." That was enough after that. Noah began sneaking into the laundry room every evening when Adrian was busy in his office. He'd sit on a stool, watching Leela fold towels or iron shirts, and talk about everything that wasn't forbidden: books, the garden, the stars. But every conversation carried something hidden beneath it, a quiet understanding that neither dared to name. Sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, Leela would glance at him the way a mother looks at her child, with a love too deep to disguise it. And Noah saw. I started noticing small details. How she remembered every story he liked, how she knew exactly when he was sad, how her touch felt familiar. Her affection wasn't the careful kindness of a maid. It was something else. Something real. Feeling grew day by day until Noah could no longer ignore it. One afternoon, while Leela prepared his lunch, he looked at her and said quietly, "If I had a mom, I think she'd be like you." Leela froze. For a second, everything stopped. The sound of the fan, the clatter of dishes, even her breathing. Her eyes softened, but she turned away. "That's very sweet, Noah," she said, her voice breaking slightly. But Noah saw her shoulders trembling. That night, he couldn't sleep. His mind replayed the moment over and over, the way her hands shook, the way she turned away. He didn't have proof, but his heart told him something his mind couldn't deny anymore. Leela wasn't just kind. She wasn't just loyal. She was his. Didn't understand why she had to hide it, why his father hated their closeness. But he could feel the truth humming beneath everything from that night on. The house felt different. Noah's heart was awake now, and secrets, no matter how carefully buried, have a way of hearing their names whispered in the dark. It began with a fever, a soft cough in the morning, a warm forehead by noon, and by nightfall, Noah was burning up. His skin flushed red, his breaths came shallow, and his voice faded into quiet murmurs when Leela saw him. She didn't wait for permission. She rushed to his side, calling out his name in a voice that trembled. The other staff hesitated, glancing nervously toward Adrian's study, but Leela didn't care. Rules didn't matter when the boy she loved was suffering. She sat by his bed, holding a bowl of cool water and a cloth. Again and again, she dipped it, wrung it, and pressed it gently against his forehead. The room was dim, the sound of rain outside soft like whispers. "Noah," she whispered, brushing his hair from his damp skin, "you'll be all right. Just rest." His eyelids fluttered. He murmured something that made her heart tighten. "Don't go." "I'm not going anywhere," she said, and she meant it. Thor's past. The house was asleep. Only Leela and Noah stayed awake in that quiet room. Every few minutes, she changed the towel, hummed a tune, whispered his name. Then it happened again. That moment of fate that refused to stay hidden as she leaned over to adjust his pillow. The light caught her neck again. The small dark mark, that crescent-shaped birthmark, glimmered beneath her skin. Noah's eyes, half closed from fever, opened just enough to see it. His hand rose slowly, trembling, and touched the spot with the innocence of a child who simply knows it's just like mine. He murmured Lila as that cloth slipped from her hand. The room fell utterly still. Her breath stopped for a long second. She couldn't move, her mind filled with the sound of her own heartbeat. Tears welled in her eyes, the kind that come from years of silence, years of pretending. Noah turned his head and pulled his collar aside. "See," he whispered weakly. Same dot. Then he smiled, soft and sleepy. Before falling back into fevered dreams, Lila sat there in silence, her trembling fingers hovering where his hand had been. A single tear escaped, falling onto the bedsheet. She pressed her palm over her mouth, as if holding back a cry that had waited too long to be hard when morning came. Noah awoke to sunlight pouring through the curtains. His fever had broken, and the room smelled faintly of lavender and medicine. Lila was still there, asleep in the chair beside his bed, and watched her quietly, remembering every second from the night before. The touch, the mark, the look in her eyes. It hadn't been a dream. When she stirred awake, she smiled as if nothing had happened. "How do you feel?" "Better," he said, but his voice carried more meaning than the word itself. She reached out, brushed his hair back, and handed him a cup of tea. But Noah wasn't watching the cup. He was looking at her neck, hidden now beneath her hair. Didn't ask again. Not that day. But he knew. Something inside him had shifted, and it would never return to what it was over the next few days. Noah watched everything more closely. The way Leela avoided the sunlight that might reveal her mark. The way her voice softened every time she said his name. The way she lingered outside his room even when her work was done. Started to see the mansion differently. It was no longer just his father's kingdom. It was a place full of ghosts, hidden stories, buried love, unspoken pain. And for the first time, he felt brave enough to start digging in her. That week was tense. Adrian sat across the long table, reading the newspaper as usual. The air smelled of roasted vegetables and silence. Noah sat quietly, his hands clasped together, heart beating fast. Finally, he spoke. "Father," he said, his voice steady, "why does Leela have the same mark as me?" The question cut through the air like glass breaking. Godrian froze. His eyes stayed on the paper, but his jaw tightened. "That doesn't mean anything," he said flatly. "But it's the same mark." Noah pressed. In the same place. Adrian folded the newspaper slowly and set it down. His expression was cold, but beneath it was something else. Fear. "Enough, Noah. You're imagining things." "I'm not," Noah said, louder this time. "I saw it." Adrian's voice snapped. "Enough." He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. The echo filled the dining hall. Then he turned and walked away, leaving Noah alone at the table. Noah sat there in silence, his heart racing. He hadn't meant to make him angry, but he had seen something in his father's eyes before he left. Not anger, not annoyance. Panic. And panic meant Truth stayed up late that night, sitting cross-legged on the floor of his room, his notebook open. He had always used it to write down questions, drawings, dreams. Now it became something else. His secret journal of Truth wrote in large letters. Why does he lie? What is he hiding? Who was she before him then, beneath it all? One final line that he circled again and again. "Leela is my mother." Didn't know how he would prove it, but he would. From that day forward, Noah began to act. He stopped asking for permission. He listened more than he spoke. He watched how the staff moved when his father entered the room. He noticed the sudden silences, the nervous glances, the way everyone avoided saying her name. He started searching the house. Every time Adrian left for work, Noah crept into unused rooms, old closets, the library, anywhere that might hide a clue. Most of the time, he found nothing but dust. But he didn't stop. He knew, deep down, that truth leaves fingerprints, and sooner or later, he would find the man. When he did, the world his father had built on silence would begin to crack. The mansion had always felt large to Noah, but after the fever, it seemed to stretch even farther, as if the walls themselves were hiding things. Every corridor whispered secrets when he walked through it. The chandeliers flickered faintly, and portraits of strangers with cold eyes lined the walls, staring at him like guards of the past. Began noticing details he had never cared about before. Doors that were always locked, rooms that were always clean but never used, drawers that his father never opened in front of anyone. There was one room in particular, Adrian's private office. Noah had been told since he was little never to step inside without permission. It was where his father held calls, signed contracts, and built his empire. Even the staff avoided entering it unless ordered told so. Naturally, that was the room that called to Noah the Moston afternoon Adrian left for a business trip. The house was unusually quiet, and Noah's curiosity burned strongly to ignore. He waited until the footsteps of the last worker faded down the hallway, before slipping through the half-opened door of the forbidden office. A smell of leather and old paper filled the air. The desk gleamed like black glass. Papers were stacked neatly, pens aligned perfectly, and behind the desk hung a single painting. A storm over the sea, waves crashing against rocks. It looked like chaos trapped inside a frame, just like the house itself. Noah moved quietly, running his fingers over the polished desk, the cold brass handles of drawers. He found nothing interesting at first: files, contracts, numbers. But something in the corner of the bookshelf caught his eye. Behind a row of encyclopedias, there was a small gap, just wide enough to hide something. He pulled the books aside and found a metal box covered in dust. As if it hadn't been touched in years, it was locked. But when he turned it over, the weak hinge gave way with a small click. Inside lay a few old letters tied with ribbon, and at the bottom, something golden, a medallion. Hay lifted it slowly, his hands trembling. The chain was broken, but the locket was still beautiful, engraved with two initials, A. And when he opened it, his breath caught. On one side was a photograph. Adrian, much younger, smiling beside Leela. They stood close together, sunlight in their hair, joy in their eyes. On the other side, a small engraving read, "For our baby who is coming." His knees went weak. The room seemed to spin. He read the words again and again, whispering them under his breath as if trying to be sure they were real. Or baby, it wasn't imagination. It wasn't a story. It was him. Truth had been hidden not in a locked vault, but right there, behind a row of books. His father never thought a child would touch. Closed the medallion gently, holding it to his chest. For a moment, the air around him felt lighter, as if the house itself had exhaled. Then he heard footsteps. Noah's heart jumped. He quickly shoved the books back in place, slipped the medallion into his pocket, and slipped out of the room before anyone saw it. Didn't stop running until he reached the kitchen, where Leela was wiping the counter, her hands moving slowly. Tireless looked up in surprise when he burst in. "Noah, what's wrong?" Didn't speak. He just held out the medallion. When she saw it, her hands froze. The color drained from her face. She reached out with trembling fingers and touched it as if it were a ghost, returning from another life. Her eyes filled instantly. "Where did you find this?" "In Father's office," Noah said softly. "Is it true?" Leela looked down at the locket again. Her tears fell silently onto the metal surface. "Yes," she whispered. The word was barely audible, but it was Anik. Noah felt the world tilt beneath him. All the questions, all the lonely nights, the dreams of the woman he couldn't name. Everything finally made sense. He wanted to speak, to cry, to laugh, but his throat locked up. Leela knelt, cupping his face in her hands. "I wanted to tell you every day," she said through tears. "But I wasn't allowed." "Why?" he asked, his voice trembling. Why did he hide it? Before she could answer, the kitchen door burst open. Adrian stood there, his face pale with fear. For a moment, none of them spoke. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. Then Adrian strode forward, snatching the medallion from Lila's hand. "How dare you?" he shouted. "You promised never to speak of this." Lila rose slowly, her eyes steady even through tears. "He found it on his own," she said quietly. You can't hide the truth, for Adrian turned toward Noah, his voice sharp. This means nothing. Do you understand me? It's just an old photograph, but Noah didn't look away this time. It means everything. He said. Adrian's breath caught, his anger faltering for just a second. Noah could see fear behind it, a fear deeper than rage. You lied to me, Noah whispered. My whole life. Adrian's hands trembled. You don't understand. I understand enough, Noah said, stepping closer to Leela. You made her hide. You made me think she was just a servant. The silence that followed was heavier than shouting. Adrian's face hardened again. Go to your room, he said coldly. No. The word came out clear, stronger than Noah expected. I'm staying here. With her. Lila's tears flowed freely now, but her eyes were full of pride. Adrian's expression cracked, a mixture of disbelief, anger, and something else. Lasse turned away without another word, slamming the door so hard the windows shook. The kitchen was quiet again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This one was full of truth, painful, raw, but real. Lila sank into a chair, holding the medallion close to her chest. Noah sat beside her and took her hand. For the first time, they didn't need to pretend. The walls that had separated them for years had finally cracked, and in the rubble of lies, they found something unbreakable. The simple truth that had been there all along. They were mother and son. That night, thunder rolled above the mansion. The sky was dark, heavy with rain, as if nature itself had chosen to echo the storm brewing inside those. While Adrian stood alone in his office, staring out the window, his reflection looked older than he remembered, tired, shadowed, worn by years of pretending. The medallion lay on the desk beside him, gleaming faintly under the lamplight. Hated that object, not because of what it was, but because of what it reminded him of, the one truth he could never erswin. The door opened softly behind him. He didn't turn. He didn't have to. He already knew who it was. Close the door, he said quietly. Lila obeyed. She stood in the middle of the room, her hands folded, her face pale but composed. There were no more tears now, only exhaustion. We need to talk, Adrian said, his tone calm but sharp like glass. You've broken the one rule I gave you. I didn't tell him anything, she replied. He found it on his own. Adrian turned at last. Because you led him there. Don't play innocent with me. I saw the way you've looked at him, the way you've always looked at him. Lila took a step closer. He's my son, Adrian. You can't expect me to stop loving him. I expected you to keep your promise, and I did, she said, her voice trembling with anger. 4 years, I stayed quiet while he grew up thinking his mother didn't want him. Do you have any idea what that felt like? Adrian's jaw tightened. You knew the agreement. You knew what would happen if anyone found out. Yes, she said bitterly. And I agreed because you left me no choice. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Adrian turned away, running a hand through his hair. For a moment, his voice lost its edge. I was protecting him, he muttered. Protecting both of you. Lila's eyes filled with disbelief. Protecting us. You buried us. You made me live in the same house as my own child, pretending I was just a help. You think that's protection? Adrian slammed his fist against the desk. The medallion rattled. You don't understand what was at stake. The company, the board, the investors. If they knew I had a child with a woman who worked here, they would have judged you. She interrupted. And that mattered more than your own son. Adrian's voice dropped, low and cold. It mattered to everything I built. My name, my reputation, my legacy. Lila stared at him. Your legacy? She repeated softly. Adrian, your son is your legacy. And you've turned him against. Yao looked at her then, really looked. The woman he had once loved, the mother of his child. There was something in his eyes that wasn't anger now. It was regret, but pride still wrapped around him like armor. You had a choice, he said quietly. You could have left and never seen him again. Lila shook her head. I stayed because I couldn't walk away. Even if it meant scrubbing floors instead of holding him in public. Even if it meant hearing him call me by my first name instead of mother. Her voice cracked. You have no idea what that cost a person. Adrian said nothing. The sound of rain filled the silence between them. Lila took a slow breath. You said once that it would only be for a little while, that when things settled, we could tell him. But the years passed, and you never kept your word. Why? Adrian's eyes fell to the floor. He didn't answer. Was it shame? She is scared. Looked up. It was Serva. Lila stepped closer, her voice shaking with contained fury. No, Adrian. It was cowardice. Words hit like a slap. He flinched, just barely, but Lila turned toward the door, her shoulders trembling. You can keep your company. Keep your reputation. But you've lost the one thing that mattered. Adrian's voice came out, softer now. And what's that? She looked back, eyes full of grief. Your son's trust. And she left, closing the door behind her that night. Leila couldn't sleep. The storm had passed, but her heart was still loud. She sat in her small room at the end of the servants' hall, holding an old photograph she kept hidden, a picture of her holding baby Noah, taken before Adrian's deal had stripped everything away. She traced his tiny face with her thumb. He had her smile, her eyes, her mark. I'm sorry, she whispered, pressing the photo against her chest. I thought silence would protect you, but I see now. It only hurt you. Tears fell freely now, not of guilt, but of release. Went to the window. The garden outside shimmered in the moonlight, wet with rain. Somewhere beyond the walls, Noah was sleeping. Finally knowing the truth, could almost feel the weight of years lifting from her chest for. So long she had obeyed Adrian out of fear of losing Noah, fear of losing her place, fear of the world's judgment. But that fear was gone now because truth, once spoken, even whispered, cannot be caged again. Meanwhile, Noah wasn't sleeping either. He sat by his window, staring at the medallion that now rested safely under his pillow. He had taken it back quietly while Adrian wasn't looking. To trace the engraved letters. With his finger, A and LH's pronounced words for our baby, who is coming, glowed softly in the moonlight. He whispered them aloud, over and over, until they became a kind of prayer. Didn't know what would happen next. Maybe his father would be angrier. Maybe everything would fall apart. But for the first time in his life, he didn't feel lost. Knew who he was, and that truth, fragile as it was, made him stronger than any secret ever could. Days passed, but the house didn't return to normal. The air was heavy, not with silence this time, but with tension. The kind that creeps into every corner, sits in every breath, and makes even the sunlight seem afraid to enter. Adrian avoided Noah and Leila as much as he could. Meals were quiet, meetings short, and the staff spoke in whispers. The mansion, once a symbol of control and elegance, now felt like it was holding its breath. Noah felt it every moment. He saw it in the way the servants looked at him with pity, in the way doors shut quickly when he approached, and in the way his father's footsteps echoed like thunder through the hall. Something was breaking, not just between his parents, but in the very bones of the house. One afternoon, Noah sat by the staircase, tracing the shape of the medallion under his shirt. Leila had been distant since her confrontation with Adrian. He noticed how she moved carefully now, her eyes lowered, her smile thin. Era wanted to talk to her, to tell her it was okay, that he knew, that he didn't care what anyone said. But something inside him told him to wait, and then it happened. Ed heard voices down the hall, low at first, then sharper. He recognized them instantly, Adrian and Leila. Without thinking, Noah crept closer, pressing his back against the wall near the library. The voices were coming from the office, the same forbidden room where everything had begun to crouch down. Heart pounding. You can't keep him from me, Adrian's voice said, firm but strained. You're filling his head with nonsense. I've told him nothing, Leila answered. He doesn't need me to. He's not a child anymore, Adrian. He sees the truth. Adrian snapped. You call this truth? You've destroyed the balance of this house. Leila's voice rose, trembling but strong. No, Adrian. You destroyed it the moment you decided that your reputation mattered more than your family. There was a pause, long and heavy. Then Adrian spoke again, quieter this time. Do you know what would happen if this got out? If the world found out what I did, who I was with, how this child came to be? Everything I've built would crumble. Do you understand that I understand that you built it on lies? Leila said softly. Noah's fingers tightened around the banister. I won't let you turn him against me, Adrian said, his voice rising again. I don't need to, Leila whispered. You've done that yourself. There was movement, a sharp sound, a chair scraping, footsteps pacing. Then Adrian's voice dropped into something colder. If you tell him everything, if you say one word more than you already have, you'll regret it. You'll lose everything, Leila. Your job, your place, your access to him. You'll never see him again. Lila's breath caught. You wouldn't. You know what I'm capable of. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the rain tapping faintly against the window. Noah's pulse hammered in his ears. He wanted to burst through the door, to protect her, to shout at his father, but something in Lila's voice stopped him. She wasn't crying this time. When she finally spoke, her words were quiet, but full of strength. I'm not afraid of you anymore. Adrian didn't respond right away. Noah imagined his father standing still, caught off guard by the defiance in her voice. something he hadn't heard in years. Then Adrian said flatly, "We'll see." Door slam, and Noah ducked back behind the staircase, just in time to see his father stride down the hallway, his face a storm of rage and fear. When the footsteps faded, Noah stood frozen for a moment, his mind racing. He knew what that meant. Adrian was planning something, couldn't let it happen that night. Noah sat awake long after the lights went out. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a soft mist that pressed against the windows. He pulled out his notebook again, the one full of drawings and questions, and began to write. But this time, he didn't write questions. He wrote a plane was done waiting for truth to find him. Now, he was going to protect. I began with the things he knew, the medallion, the photo, the mark. Then he added what he had overheard, the threats, the silence, the fear. He circled the word proof 3 times. If Adrian tried to take Leela away, Noah needed something stronger than words, something that could expose everything. Thought about the locked drawers in the office, the old letters tied with ribbon, the documents his father never mentioned. He would find them all. He would gather every secret, every lie, and make sure the truth could never be buried again. And if his father tried to send Leela away, Noah would make sure everyone knew. I didn't know how yet, but he felt something powerful inside him, something he had never felt before. Courage. Next morning, sunlight broke through the clouds, bright and cold. Noah walked into the dining room, where Adrian sat reading the newspaper as usual. Morning, Noah said, his tone calm but deliberate. Adrian barely looked up. Morning. Noah sat across from him. Lila's not working. Toby. Adrian's hands paused on the paper. She's taking a few days off. Noah frowned. That's strange. She didn't say anything. Adrian folded the paper neatly, placing it on the table. His expression was unreadable. She needs rest. Noah held his father's gaze. You mean you told her to stay away? Adrian's eyes narrowed. Watch your tone. But Noah didn't look away this time. Why are you so afraid of her telling me the truth? Adrian pushed his chair back, standing. Noah stood too. You're not protecting me, father. You're protecting yourself. Silence between them was sharp enough to cue. Adrian turned and left without a word. Noah stood alone in the vast dining hall, the sound of his heartbeat echoing louder than anything else. He didn't need more proof. He could see it now, his father's fear, his guilt, the cracks in the perfect image he tried so hard to protect. But fear wasn't going to win anymore. Noah picked up the medallion from his pocket and looked at it one more time. For our baby who is coming. He smiled faintly. You tried to hide her, he whispered, but you can't anymore. Inside, the mist began to lift from the garden, and a thin beam of sunlight touched the glass. Truth, long buried, was beginning to breathe. The morning passed slowly, like time itself was reluctant to move. Leela didn't appear anywhere in the house. Her absence felt like a missing heartbeat, a hollow in the rhythm of Noah's day. Even the sunlight looked duller through the tall windows. The silence returned, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This one carried grief and warning. Noah knew something was wrong. Adrian had said she needed rest, but he hadn't said where. The mansion was huge, with guest rooms that hadn't been used in years, locked doors and hallways that went nowhere. He searched discreetly, pretending to wander, pretending to read, until he was sure his father wasn't watching. And then, when the evening shadows stretched across the marble floors, he went back to the offensive forbidden room. Stood quiet, the curtains drawn. The desk was spotless, as if someone had cleaned it with purpose. But Noah wasn't looking for what was visible. He was searching for what was hidden. Closed the door softly behind him, the air heavy with old paper and memory, the smell of dust mixed with the faint scent of tobacco. The room of a man who had lived a double life. For DeLong began to search drawers first, bottom to top, files, contracts, numbers, nothing human, nothing real. Just the same mechanical perfection that had always surrounded Adrian's world. Then he saw it, the bookshelf again, the one where he had found the medallion. Hay ran his hands along the spines, pulling a few books down, tapping the wooden frame. It sounded hollow. His heart beat faster. He pushed harder, and the entire panel shifted slightly, revealing a small gap. Behind it, hidden in the wall, was a narrow compartment. Inside were letters, dozens of them, wrapped in faded blue ribbon. Pulled them out, his fingers trembling. The paper was old, yellowed around the edges. The handwriting was soft and curved, Lila's handwriting. He recognized it instantly. Unfolded one letter and began to read. Adrian, he's growing so fast. He said his first word today, light. I wish you could have seen his face. You said you'd visit when things settled, but every week the distance grows. I still believe you love him. I have to believe that. Otherwise, what have all these sacrifices been for? Noah swallowed hard and opened another. Adrian, they told me you moved into the new house. The one you promised we'd live in together. I understand. You have responsibilities. You said the world would never accept me. But what about him? He didn't ask for this silence. He deserves more than a secret life. Sometimes he asks where you are. I tell him you're busy building a world for him. I just hope that's still true. By the fourth letter, his hands were shaking. Adrian, I can't do this anymore. Every time I see him, I want to tell him who I am. But you've forbidden it. I agreed because I thought I was protecting him. But I see now, the lie is hurting him more than the truth ever could. He loved him too much to keep pretending. Noah's breath caught. The words blurred through his tears. It wasn't just his mother's story. It was his. Every letter carried the weight of years he never knew existed. The sacrifices, the fear, the longing. He felt it all in his chest like fire. He gathered the letters carefully, tying them back together, and hid them beneath his shirt. These were his proof, not a scandal, not a shame, but of love, real, raw, and pure. He turned to leave, but the door creaked open. Adrian stood there for a moment. Neither spoke. The air seemed to stop moving. What are you doing here? Adrian asked. His voice low. Noah held his ground, looking for the truth. Adrian stepped closer. Those are private, they're not yours anymore, Noah said, his voice shaking but firm. They're letters from my mother. Adrian's expression faltered. Give them to me. Noah clutched them tighter. Another word echoed off the walls, small but powerful. Adrian's face hardened. You think you understand, but you don't. You have no idea what it was like back then. The choices I had to make. You chose yourself. Noah said quietly. You chose your image. You chose your fear. But she chose love. Adrian's jaw clenched. You don't know what love is. Yes, I do, Noah said, because I saw it every day. When she looked at me, silence that followed was deep, broken only by the faint ticking of the clock. Adrian's hands trembled. He wanted to shout, to take the letters, to crush them and end it all. But something in his son's eyes stopped him. The same eyes Leela had, the same strength. For the first time, Adrian saw himself not as a man in control, but as the architect of his own loneliness. He stepped back slowly. You think you're doing the right thing, he said, but the world doesn't care about right. It only remembers what's ruined it. Noah took a breath, then let it remember him. With that, he walked past his father. The letters clutched to his chest. At night, Noah found Lalash was sitting in the garden, her hands folded in her lap, the moonlight silvering her hair. When she saw him, she stood quickly, but when she saw what he was holding, she placed the letters in her hands. He kept them all, he said softly. Looked down at them, her lips trembling. You found them. I had to, Noah said. You wrote to him for years. You never stopped. Lila's eyes filled, tears spilling silently onto the paper. I thought he burned them. He didn't, Noah said. He hid them, like he hid you. But I won't let him hide you anymore. She looked up at him, her face full of both grief and pride. Noah, you've done what I never could. He smiled faintly. You gave me the strength to do it. They sat together in silence. The letters spread between them like bridges over years of pain. Above them, the clouds began to part. The moon shone through, pale, luminous, and free. It wasn't over yet, but something had shifted again. This time, in their favorite truth was no longer hiding. It was alive, breathing, and waiting for the dawn. The next morning felt different. House that had once echoed with control now trembled under something new, consequence. Adrian's footsteps were slower, his voice quieter. The servants whispered more openly, sensing a shift they couldn't. Noah noticed everything. The glances, the unfinished sentences, even the faint unease that followed Adrian like a shadow. It was as if the truth they had tried to bury had begun to seep through the walls, staining everything it touched. And in the middle of it all, Leela moved with quiet grace, no longer hiding, no longer shrinking. For the first time in years, she looked like herself. Adrian was unraveling. His empire had been built on an illusion. Perfection, order, control. And illusions are fragile things. That afternoon, a black car arrived at the gates. Noah watched from the window as two men in suits stepped out. They weren't strangers. They were board members from Adrian's company. They spoke briefly with the house staff. Before Adrian appeared at the door, their conversation was tense, quick, and clipped. One of the men handed Adrian a folder. He opened it, scanned the contents, and for the first time, Noah saw his father's expression crack, not with anger, but with first men left soon after, their faces grim. Adrian stood motionless at the door for several seconds before retreating into his office. Noah knew better than to follow, but he also knew what that look meant. The world outside had begun to whisper. Someone had found out at night. The house was eerily silent again. Lila was in her room, sorting through old belongings, things she had kept hidden in a small wooden chest. A baby blanket, a photograph, a letter she had never sent. She looked at them with the soft ache of someone saying goodbye to ghosts when Noah entered. She smiled faintly. "You shouldn't be up, I can't sleep," he said, sitting beside her. "Something's happening. I saw men come today." They looked angry. Lila nodded slowly. "They're from his company. It was only a matter of time. What will they do?" She sighed. The truth scares powerful people, Noah, especially when they built everything on lies. He washed her hands. "Steady now, sure. Are you scared?" Lila shook her head. "Not anymore." She looked at him and smiled softly. "You've already done what I was too afraid to do. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Noah reached out and took her hand. "I won't let him send you away again." Her eyes glistened. "You sound just like him when he was young. The same fire, the same belief in right and wrong." Look down. "I'm not like him." Lila squeezed his hand gently. "No, you're better." Down the hall, Adrian sat at his desk. The papers from the folder spread before him. Words like shareholders, press, investigation leapt off the packet. He had spent his life controlling stories, shaping what people believed. Now the story was turning against him. A photo had surfaced. The old photograph from the locket. Someone had leaked it. No one knew how. But the image of a young Adrian with Lila had begun to circulate quietly among business circles. Questions followed. Rumors spread. Has stared at the picture now. The faces of two people who had once loved each other without fear. It hurt to look at it when the phone rang. He didn't answer. He simply let it ring until it fell silent again for the first time in decades. Adrian felt powerless, poured himself a drink, but his hand shook so much that the glass clinked against the bottle. He sat down heavily, staring into the amber liquid, searching for answers that weren't there. Then he looked at the photo again, and something in him broke. He pressed his hand to his eyes and whispered, "What have I done?" But the walls didn't answer. They never did. The next morning, Adrian didn't appear at breakfast. The servants moved quietly, uneasy. Lila and Noah sat together at the long table, the food untouched between them. "He's avoiding you," Lila said softly. "He's avoiding the truth." Noah replied. Lila sighed. "Sometimes they're the same thing." Noah looked toward the hall. "I need to talk to him." Lila shook her head. "Not now. He's angry and frightened." "That's a dangerous mix." But Noah stood. "Anyway, if I don't, he'll keep pretending." Walked down the hall, each step echoing through the house like a countdown. When he reached the office door, it was half open. Adrian sat behind the desk, staring at the same photograph again. The papers were gone, the drink untouched. His eyes were red. "Sleepless father," Noah said. Adrian didn't look up. "What do you want?" "Noah, I want you to tell the truth." "Not to me, to yourself." Adrian laughed bitterly. "You think it's that simple?" "It is," Noah said. "You made it complicated." Adrian finally looked at him. "You think the world forgives truth? It doesn't. It devours it. You're still young. You don't understand how people destroy what they can't control." Noah stepped closer. "Maybe, but you destroyed us." For Adrian's eyes darkened. "You think I did all this for me? I built this so you never have to suffer. I wanted to protect you by erasing her," Noah said, "by turning her into a ghost in her own home." Adrian slammed his fist against the desk. An odd echo rang through the room. Then silence. Noah didn't move. He just stood there, breathing hard, his eyes never leaving his father's. Finally, Adrian's voice broke. "You look just like her when you're angry." Noah didn't reply. Adrian leaned back, exhausted. "It's too late now. The truth's already out there." "Then let it be," Noah said softly. "Maybe that's the only thing that can save us." Adrian looked at him, his expression hollow. "You think truth saves, Noah, but it only burns." Noah turned to leave. "Then let it burn everything that isn't real." And for the first time, Adrian had no answer outside. The sky was changing. The air smelled of rain again, but this time it carried something else. Lila watched from the garden as Noah stepped out of the mansion, sunlight breaking through the clouds behind him. She knew what was happening. The world beyond those walls would soon know everything, but instead of fear, she felt peace because truth, once alive, can't die, no matter how many times it's buried. And Noah, her son, had become its voice. News spreads like wine. By the end of that week, Adrian's name was everywhere, in papers, on screens, whispered in the polished hallways of the powerful. The photograph, once hidden in a locket, now circled the public world. the young man of wealth beside a woman of humble origins, and the quiet revelation that their connection had been said Noah watched from the background. As headlines began to twist the story, some called it scandal, others called it betrayal, but none of them saw it for what it really was. The story of a man who feared the world more than he loved the truth. Adrian's empire began to shake. Stocks fell. Business partners distanced themselves. His office phone rang without pause. His assistant quit without a word. Every polished surface of his world now reflected something he couldn't escape. Shamit didn't leave the mansion for 3 days. Noah and Leela stayed silent through it all. They didn't gloat, didn't argue, didn't hide. They simply existed, waiting for the moment when everything would settle into something new or break completely. On the 4th day, Adrian came downstairs to look smaller somehow, not in stature, but in spirit. The sharpness that once defined him had dulled. He moved slowly, as if every step weighed a lifetime. He entered the kitchen where Leela was making tea. The staff scattered quietly. Only the 3 of them remained, father, mother, and saw. For a moment, no one spoke. The sound of boiling water filled the space. Then Adrian said softly, "You should have left when you had the chance." Leela turned and let him grow up believing his mother was nothing. Adrian looked down. "You think the world will treat him kindly now? They'll call him names. They'll drag him into this mess. He'll hate me for what I've done." Noah's voice broke the silence. "I don't hate you, Adrian." For Noah stood by the doorway, his hands trembling slightly, but his voice steady. "I hate what you did, but not you." Adrian met his eyes. There was no anger there now, only confusion, pain, disbelief. "After everything I've done?" "Yes," Noah said, "because she taught me forgiveness. And you taught me what happens when you live without it." Lila's eyes glistened. She looked at her son, the boy who had grown into the kind of man she had prayed. He would beckon. Adrian's mouth opened, but no words came. His eyes fell, though he tried to hide it. For decades he had built a life of steel and control, but now all of it was falling apart. And standing before him was the only thing that truly mattered. Ed sat down heavily at the table. "I don't know how to fix this. You start," Noah said gently, "by telling the truth yourself." Adrian stared at the steam rising from the teacup. The quiet stretched between them, fragile but alive. "I thought truth would destroy us," he murmured. Lila placed a cup in front of him. "No," she said softly, "it only destroys what isn't love." Adrian lifted his eyes to her. For a moment, the years between them disappeared. They were young again, standing under sunlight, dreaming of a life that never came to be. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Lila nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "I know. It wasn't enough. It couldn't undo the years. But it was real, and real was all that was left that evening." Adrian called a press conference. Noah watched from the edge of the room as his father stood before a sea of flashing lights and questions. For once, there was no prepared speech, no polished mask. Began simply, "I lied," Adrian said. "Not to my company, not to my peers, but to my own family. Years ago, I hid the truth about my son's mother because I was afraid of what people would think. I called it protection. It was pride, and pride is a slow poison that destroys everything it touches." Through was silent. "I won't defend what I did," he continued. "I can only face it. The woman I silenced was the one person who ever loved me without condition. And the son I tried to shield ended up being the one who taught me courage." Reporters wrote feverishly. Cameras flashed at boot. Adrian didn't care anymore. For the first time in his life, he wasn't speaking to them. He was speaking to her, to Leela, and to the boy who had become the man he could never be. When he stepped off the stage, the world outside would still judge him, but inside, something had shifted, a kind of release. Of the night, back in the mansion, he found Noah in the garden. The air was cool, filled with the sound of leaves rustling softly. The moon hung low, reflecting faintly in the pond where the water shimmered like glass. Adrian stood beside him, in silence for a long time. Finally, he said, "You've changed everything." Noah smiled faintly. "No, you did." Adrian looked at him, the corners of his mouth trembling. "You should hate me. I already told you," Noah said quietly. "I don't." Adrian nodded slowly. "Then maybe there's hope." They stood there for a while, no words, no walls, just the people who had finally stopped pretending. Behind them, the light from the house glowed softly, and through the window, Leela watched, her eyes full of tears and peace. For years she had lived like a shadow. Now, for the first time, she saw her family under the same light. Not perfect, not whole, But homestand sometimes honesty is the beginning of healing be mourning. News networks had shifted their tone. Some still judged, others praised the confession as courage. But to Noah, it didn't matter any. Maureen had what he needed. Not approval, not reputation, but truth, and truth, once freed, never goes back to sleep. The world didn't end. Sun still rose the next day, pale and soft, painting the mansion in a warmth it hadn't known for years. The news outside raged for a while longer, then began to fade. The world always moves on, chasing newer stories, but inside those walls, something permanent had changed. The house felt lighter. The air no longer carried that invisible weight. The portraits in the hallway, once frozen in their sternness, seemed almost to soften in the morning light. Noah woke early. He walked through the garden barefoot, dew clinging to his feet, the air cool and fresh. The trees whispered above him, and the pond reflected the first hints of dawn. For the first time, the mansion didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a place where something new could begin. Lila joined him quietly, a shawl around her shoulders. Her eyes were tired, but peaceful. They stood side by side, watching the sky turn from gray to gold. Do you remember? She said softly. How do you used to sit by this pond and throw stones, asking if your mother was watching you? Noah smiled. I used to watch from that window, she said, pointing to the far wing of the house. Every time you smiled, I thank the heavens for letting me stay close. Even if you didn't know. Looked at her, the woman who had endured years of silence, humiliation, and love without name, and for a moment, words weren't enough. He simply hugged her, held him tightly, her face buried against his shoulder, her tears soaking through his shirt. It wasn't sorrow now, it was release, the kind that comes when the past finally loosens its grip when they pull apart. She smiled. You've become everything I hoped for. Noah shook his head gently. No, Mother, I just became what you raised me to be, even when you couldn't say the word. Her tears fell again, but this time, she laughed through them. The sound was like sunlight breaking through the last of the clouds. Adrian appeared later. That morning had aged overnight. The lines around his eyes were deeper, his hair grayer, his suit a little less crisp. But something else had changed. The mask he had worn for decades was gone. He stood by the door for a long moment. Before approaching them, Lila turned, their eyes meeting for the first time in years without bitterness or fear. I didn't think you'd come, she said quietly. I almost didn't, he admitted. But then I remembered how the garden used to look when we first moved here. You said it felt too big, too cold. She smiled faintly. You said you'd fill it with love. I tried, Adrian said, his voice trembling. But I built walls instead. Noah stepped back a little, letting them stand together. There was no need for him to speak. Some moments belong only to those who began the story. Adrian took a slow breath. I can't ask for forgiveness. Lila shook her head. You don't have to. Just be honest from now on. He nodded. That, I can. Dolly stood in silence, the kind that feels whole, not empty. Somewhere in the distance, a bird began to sing. Weeks passed. The world outside slowly forgot. The headlines faded. The noise died down, and the mansion, once a monument to silence and fear, began to live again. Staff spoke freely. Laughter returned to the hallways. Lila no longer wore the plain uniforms Adrian had once insisted on. She moved through the rooms with her head held high, no longer a ghost, but a woman who had reclaimed her place in her own story. Adrian, for his part, stepped down from his company. He sold his shares, donated much of his wealth, and began traveling quietly. Not for business, but for reflection. Committees. Noah joined him. They didn't talk much about the past anymore. They didn't need to. The silence between them wasn't cold now. It was gentle, healing. In the evenings, they would sit in the garden, 3 chairs now instead of 2. Layla would read aloud, her voice soft in the fading light. Adrian would listen with eyes closed, the sound of her voice like something he thought he had lost. For Noah often watched them both, the people who had once built a prison out of fear and now, at last, had learned to live freely. I realized then that forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about understanding, about choosing to see someone's wounds instead of their walls. At night, under a sky full of stars, Noah stood alone by the pond. The water was still, the reflection of the moon rippling slightly as a breeze passed. He reached into his pocket and took out the medallion. It was old now, tarnished in places, but still beautiful. The engraving, A and L, gleamed faintly in the starlight. Opened it. Looking at the photograph inside, the young faces of his parents smiled back at him, frozen in a moment before the years. Before the silence whispered, we made it. Then he closed the locket gently and placed it on a small stone beside the pond, not as something to be buried, but as something finally laid to rest behind him. Lela called softly, "Come inside, Noah." He turned, smiled, and walked back toward the light spilling from the house, warm, golden. Alavith's door closed behind them. The wind stirred the garden. The locket stayed there, catching the moonlight, a quiet testament to everything they had lost and everything they had found again and above it. Old mansion, once haunted by silence, dawn began to rise, not loud, not grand, but beautifully, quietly true.